2020, a weird year for film, a weirder year for years. And yet, despite the slow start, I'd say 2020 ended up being a pretty strong year for film. With the number of big studio releases getting delayed, it feels like a lot of smaller movies and newer talents got the chance to shine this year. With that in mind, what a pleasure it is to present my top 10 films of 2020. Gonna kick things off with some honourable mentions, which in no particular order go to Sound of Metal, Shirley, Baby Teeth, The Father, Promising Young Woman, Quo Vadis Aida, The White Tiger, and The Wolf of Snow Hollow. All bloody very good films. Right, into the top 10, and at number 10 we have the absolutely horrible Possessor. In Possessor, we follow an agent working for an organisation who are able to take control of people's bodies against their will. And I don't want to say too much beyond that. I went into this film knowing next to nothing and was all the more traumatised for it. It's an incredibly smart, stylish, provocative bit of science fiction that manages to unwind into this trippy, disturbing psychological horror. Very visceral, nightmarish stuff. If you were a fan of Annihilation or Ex Machina, it definitely has some of those flavours in the mix. So, in absolute contrast, at number 9 we have Driveways. When a shy, lonely kid accompanies his mum in clearing out his late aunt's house, he strikes up an unexpected friendship with an elderly veteran who lives next door. Driveways is pretty much the cinematic equivalent to a warm cup of hot chocolate. It's this very small, undramatic story, and yet the filmmaking is so deeply kind and real and felt that the whole thing is just completely absorbing. Driveways is a film with such a big heart that pays real attention to tiny but meaningful details. Also a beautiful and poignant send-off to the late Brian Dennehy, who passed away a month before the film released. It's delightful. I can't imagine not having a good time watching this film. Okay, with these next two, you could make a great sort of stare death in the face and somehow feel better for it double feature. So kicking us off on that journey, we have Soul. A jazz musician stuck in an unfulfilling job finally lands his dream gig. However, immediately after getting the news, he falls down a manhole, dies, and is taken to a strange realm between Earth and the afterlife. On some level, this film takes an honest swing at what it is at the core of our being that makes us who we are. On another level, this film is about a man stuck in the body of a cat trying to get to a jazz concert in time, and if that isn't the most Pixar dichotomy, I don't know what is. I honestly think this is one of their most adult, thinky, and ultimately rewarding films. A cosmically comforting story about separating passion and purpose, about the importance of chasing your bliss, and a very honest conversation about the emptiness that can come once you've caught it. Between this, Coco, and Toy Story 4, I think it's fair to say that they still have some of that secret sauce stored somewhere deep in the attics of Pixar. So then, once you've finished Soul, the second half of the double feature comes in the form of Dick Johnson is Dead. As her dad nears the end of his life, documentary filmmaker Kirsten Johnson stages his death in various bizarre, macabre, and comical ways to help them both face the inevitable. This one really got me, in a way that I just didn't see coming. Based on the premise, you'd be totally forgiven for thinking this documentary sounds a little morbid. But this film actually takes a very tender look at mortality, particularly through the lens of the relationship we have with our parents. It managed to both crack me up and totally destroy me, ultimately leaving me with this incredibly thankful feeling. It's a beautiful, difficult, bittersweet celebration of both life and death. Give it a spin, have a good laugh, have a good cry. Okay, at number 6 we have the wonderful Another Round. Based on the notion of a Norwegian philosopher who claimed that humans are born with a blood alcohol content that's 0.05% too low, 4 school teachers decide to put this theory to the test by maintaining a constant level of alcohol in their blood to see how it affects their social and professional lives. Not only is this one of the funniest films of the year, It's one that has this really fascinating, complex debate at the centre of it. I was surprised by how much the film isn't scared to dwell on both the negatives and positives that come with drinking. It's neither an endorsement nor a PSA. Instead, the film offers this really fun, thoughtful, comical, and honest conversation about who alcohol allows us to be, for better or worse. Smartly working in themes of leadership, overcoming anxieties, and falling into addiction. All this in the esteemed company of the absolutely fucking incredible Mads Mikkelsen. Okay, into the top 5, and taking that number 5 spot is Nomadland. A woman in her 60s who, after losing everything in the Great Recession, embarks on a journey through the American West, living as a van-dwelling, modern-day nomad. So Frances McDormand is one of the only actors in this film. Almost everyone else is a real nomad playing themselves, which gives the film almost this like half-drama, half-documentary feel to it, which I found completely mesmerising. I was lucky enough to see Nomadland at the BFI as part of London Film Festival, and it was such a transporting experience. It sounds dumb, but I genuinely had to take a second once I'd stepped out of the cinema to reacclimatise and adjust to the fact that I wasn't in the middle of the American West. Between this and her earlier film, The Rider, I think Chloe Zhao has confirmed herself as one of the most observant, empathetic and authentic filmmakers working today. Nomadland deserves all the love it's getting. It seems to be the frontrunner for Best Picture, and I think it would make a very worthy winner. Right, so at number 4 we have my favourite documentary of the year, Boys State. In an unusual experiment, over 1,000 17-year-old boys from Texas joined together to build a representative government from the ground up, wherein only one will be elected governor. This film so brilliantly captures a microcosm of the American political system in a way that would honestly feel like parody if you were to write it. The whole thing plays out like a political drama, this theatrical, perfectly plotted epic of heroes and villains. Going in, I was very much expecting it to be an hour and 50 minutes of just horrible boys being horrible boys. And whilst that's certainly an overriding theme, I was actually most struck by how oddly sweet and noble many of them were. The best and worst of politics is very much on show here. And by the last act, I was so ridiculously, unironically invested in their election. It's hilarious and tragic and depressing and uplifting and honestly, just one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. It is a must-watch. Which takes us into the top 3 with a film that went criminally under the radar, The Climb. Told across 7 chapters, The Climb follows the turbulent and complex friendship of 2 men over the span of several years. Yeah, this is a real good one. The whole thing has this really fun, heightened, almost sketch-like dialogue throughout. And yet the dynamic between the 2 characters is so weirdly grounded and real to life. Despite the low budget, each chapter is rigorously well staged, with sequences of total filmmaking magic. You can tell this was a real passion project for Carl Marvin and Michelangelo Covino, who wrote, directed and star in the film together. It's cleverly scripted, stylishly put together, hilariously well performed, sweet, horrible, weird and moving, and I just loved it. Totally drawn in by this one, right from the opening scene to the final sequence. Okay, into the top 2, and I debated for a while what order to put these in, so by a hair, at number 2, we have Manari. A Korean-American family moved to a farm in Arkansas in search of its own American dream. I just adore this film, and it's going to be hard to say more than that, because in all honesty, I was just totally under its spell. Manari is this warm, soft, slow-moving film that just washed over me, and I loved every second of it. Everything from the cast to the score to the writing and direction was just so utterly delightful and tender. It is a special little film, and once it had finished, I just sat and listened to the soundtrack and had a nice cry and missed my grandparents and called my parents, and it was sad and cathartic and lovely. I'd recommend Manari to absolutely anyone. It is truly medicine for the soul. Also, easily one of the best soundtracks of the last 10 years. Instantly up there in the pantheon of Phantom Thread and Her and If Beale Street Could Talk for just an exceptionally beautiful score. Huge props to Emile Mosseri for not only scoring my second favourite film of the year, but also, coincidentally, my favourite film of the year, which in 2020 was Kajillionaire. Two con artists have spent 26 years training their only daughter to scam and steal at every turn. During a hastily conceived heist, they charm a stranger into joining them, only to have their entire dynamic fall apart. Now, I should probably start by saying that unlike Manari, Kajillionaire is definitely more of an acquired taste. But my god, did this film speak to me in all of its unpredictable peculiarity. I instantly fell in love with how funny, beautifully weird, and thoughtful the writing was. It really made my head spin. For days afterwards, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. Because there's this incredibly clever contradiction baked into the DNA of this film. It manages to be both icy cold, but incredibly vulnerable and emotional. It's somehow simultaneously really sweet, yet intensely cynical. And through its surreal exploration of how we reflect our parents' upbringing, the film ends up speaking to both the cosmic importance of opening up your heart to the world, and yet in parallel demonstrates the soul-crushing vulnerability that comes with doing so. It's a film that really speaks to the contradiction, complexity, and futility of it all. I was just blown away. And despite having seen it several times now, by design, I still can't tell if I find the ending sort of horrible or incredibly romantic. Oh, and it's kind of like a heist movie as well, so that's fun. Kajillionaire is fittingly both a total gut punch and yet also kind of a fun, easy watch. I wasn't previously familiar with Miranda July, but needless to say, I cannot wait to go and check out everything she's done. But there we go, art is subjective, so let me know what your favourite films of 2020 were. Also, I've been making these annual top 10 film lists for 5 years now, so out of total self-indulgent curiosity, I'd love to know how many of the now 50 films I've recommended you've seen. Anyway, thank you for watching, drink lots of water, be empathetic, and get off my lawn.